All right, chapters 4, section 3 and 4. We'll just knock them both out together. And we're just going a little deeper in federalism. Remember, federalism is this concept of the government and how our national government, based out of D.C., as well as our state governments, have to work together to provide the services that we expect from them. Okay? So there's an interplay between all of this. And so we talked about this before. The federal government will often hand money to states for the purpose of doing something. And so that's what we're going to be getting into here. Okay, so grant, even, you guys know this when it comes to a financial grant, it's money you don't have to pay back. Okay, if it's a loan, you got to pay it back, and usually with interest. So this is money given to the states when there's no money required back. Okay, so again, that money comes from taxpayers from all over America are paying to the federal government, and the federal government is turning around and giving that over to state governments. Okay, and there are certain things that the federal government wants to accomplish, and by handing money, they can literally hand money to the states to make them do it. Okay, and so this is the idea, and this is it's wealth redistribution, taking money from the rich and getting it down to the middle class and poor. Okay, and so there are different ways to do this. One is called a categorical formula grant, and honestly, if you think about this, this is the most this is the most restrictive. The categorical formula grants is the most restrictive, meaning states don't have as much leeway. They got to be very exact in how money's spent, and this is the least restrictive. Okay, so that's categorical formula grants. So when it comes to welfare, how welfare is run, Medicaid, another great example is Section 8 housing. Section 8 is it's a part of the federal law system, particularly for welfare and things like that. And so there are exact rules that the state must follow in terms of who they give those houses to, the rent control, rent subsidies, all that stuff. Project grant, okay, and usually this is for something that's not something that is happening all the time. So there's usually a certain defined period. You'll see this at universities. Project grant. Somebody wants to research. Okay, what does it mean when sewage, flows out of the Tijuana River estuary? Again, a lot of that's being generated, on the other side of the border. Yet it's polluting beaches in San Diego, which is part of the United States. Well, there are project grants for SDSU, Point Loma Nazarene University, UCSD, San Diego University. There are researchers looking at that, and they've applied to grants to figure out how that's working and how best to alleviate it. And that's, again, our government is doing that to make a better environment. And so they're taking tax money and giving it for that. So there's a whole process for writing a grant proposal. A lot of times the government will put out a request for proposals, sort of say, hey, look, these are the general guidelines of what we would approve, and these are the types of things that we would like you see researching. And then a professor would say, all right, well, I want to research this, and there's usually a back and forth where it gets kicked back down to the professor, and the professor has to change the grant. And so once it's all written, there are requirements written into it that they have to meet certain standards, that they show where their money's going, all this kind of stuff. And so it's not just wasted. In fact, there actually is a product at the other end of it where something valuable has been contained. And a lot of the great research that has turned into some of the amazing products that we have flowed from project grants. All right, block grant is a little less, a lot less strings. It's much easier for the government to spend that money, and we do this for roads, houses, things like that. Sometimes when it comes to law enforcement, you'll have federal money given to local law enforcement, maybe dealing with you have high crime rate areas. The federal government's there to help. So if you have a big city can weigh down the whole government, the whole national government's economy, and so crime is part of that, and so that's where block grants will be given to help out for those kind of things. And then finally, revenue sharing. And revenue sharing, there's certain, okay, you need to be spending money for these particular types of things, but there's less strings. So the beauty of having less strings, meaning revenue sharing, is that the states can experiment and try something different, and each state, can make a system that works best for their people. I mean, what works in Wyoming doesn't always work in Hawaii, and so that's the beauty of revenue sharing. Gives them the most flexibility possible to solve problems in the way that they see fit. Problem with revenue sharing is you got a lot of crazy ideas out there that don't work, and so it's hard to tell whether this is a waste of money or not. And all I can just say is the government gives money out in lots of different ways, and hopefully you get more of what works. Now, one concept that's out there is a mandate. A mandate is a law. So if you have a federal law that says you states must do certain things, and those things cost money, and there's no money given to make that happen, that's what's called an unfunded mandate. And so that's where then the state has to turn around and say, all right, federal government is requiring us to do these things. We don't have the money to do it. What does it mean if we're out of compliance? And so different laws have different sort of stipulations as to what happens. So some things the states just kind of ignore because the penalty's kind of light, and other things they just can't. Well, if they can't, they don't have the money, then either they got to raise taxes themselves, or they have to cut back on spending in some other area to pay for that. Okay, so that's an unfunded mandate. Now, sanction is this concept of you're not doing well, therefore we'll take that money away from you. And so a good example of a sanction is accreditation. If we don't, if our school isn't up to standard, we can lose our accreditation, and we can lose chunks of money. And that's one of those things. And then direct order, that's similar to the federal government telling the states to do something in particular, and there's usually penalties if the states don't comply.